The knock came at 1 in the morning, 3 soft taps. And when I opened the door, June was standing there in a thin gray robe, with her hair stuck to her neck and her arms wrapped around herself like the hallway was cold, which it wasn't. It was 91 degrees at 1 in the morning, and she looked past me into the dark of my room and asked, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound casual and missing by a mile, if she could sleep in here tonight. "My act died," she said. "Around 11. I've been lying on the floor since. I can't. It's like 110 in there." We had lived in the same apartment for 14 months, and we had never once crossed the invisible line down the middle of the hall. She'd answered my ad for the second bedroom back when she was a stranger, with good references and a firm handshake. And we'd built the kind of careful, considerate coexistence that two people build when they need the rent split and don't want to ruin it. We labeled our shelves in the fridge. We knocked before we borrowed. We were friendly the way co-workers are friendly. In 14 months, she had never stood at my door in a robe at 1 in the morning, and I want to tell you the only thing keeping me awake as I stepped aside to let her in was the heat. But it wasn't. Because as she came past me into the room, a floorboard creaked somewhere out in the hall behind her. One long, settling groan of an old building in the dark, and June flinched. A full-body flinch, a flinch with her shoulders and her breath, and turned to look back at the empty hallway like she expected to find someone standing in it. There was no one. The hall was empty. She caught me watching her watch it, and she made herself laugh, and she said, "Old building. It talks." "Yeah," I said, "it talks." I gave her the bed. I took the floor, dragged my mattress topper down onto the boards under the window, where my own AC unit rattled and wheezed and lost its war with the heat 1 degree at a time. We didn't talk much at first. The fan pushed hot air around in slow circles. Then, after a while, from the dark above me, she said, "Can I ask you something weird?" "Sure. Do you ever lock your bedroom door? At night?" It was a strange question, and I almost laughed it off, and then I didn't. Because of the way she'd asked it, carefully, like the answer mattered. "No," I said. "Never have." "Why?" "No reason." A pause that was clearly a reason. "I do. Every night. I have for a year. My hand just does it now without me. But tonight the act's out, and I needed the door open for the air, and I lay there 2 hours listening to that hallway, and I couldn't do it. I couldn't stay in a room I couldn't lock." Her voice was very small. "That's the real reason I knocked. Not the heat." "Sorry. That's probably a lot." "It's not a lot," I said. "It's a little bit a lot." "Okay," I admitted. "It's a little bit a lot. But you can stay a little bit a lot's worth of nights. That's fine." She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. And something in the room loosened 1/2 a degree. And it was the first real thing either of us had said to the other in 14 months. And somewhere in the not sleeping, I heard her breathing change on the bed above me. That careful, shallow breathing of someone pretending. And I understood. The way you understand a thing before you have any words for it. That June had not come to my door because of the heat. The heat was just the reason she was allowed to say out loud. In the morning I went to look at her AC, because that's the useful roommate thing to do, and that's when the first piece of it came loose. Her window unit was newer than mine. Better, it should have outlasted mine by years. But it was dead. No hum, no click, nothing. And when I pulled the cover and traced the power back, I found the breaker for her room flipped hard to off in the panel by the front door, not tripped. Tripped is a breaker that gives up under load and sits in the middle. This was pulled all the way down, deliberately, by a hand. I flipped it back. Her unit coughed and roared to life, cold air pouring out, and June came out of the bathroom with her hair wet, and stopped dead when she heard it. You fixed it? It wasn't broken. I pointed at the panel. Somebody switched off the breaker to your room. From out here. In the middle of the night. She went very still. And then she did something that told me more than anything she'd said yet. She didn't ask who, and she didn't ask why. She walked to the panel and looked at it for a long moment, and then she walked to the window and looked down at the street, and when she turned back, her face had rearranged itself into something older and more tired than I'd ever seen on her. It didn't die, she said. Somebody killed it. June, who would come into our hallway at midnight to shut off your air conditioning? She wrapped her arms around herself again, the same way she had at my door. And she looked at me like she was deciding how much of a thing to hand a person, and how much of it would then become theirs to carry. How long have you lived here? She asked. 14 months. You know that. Do you know how many other people live in this building? She didn't wait for me to guess. 2. Us, and Mr. Okafor down the end. Everyone else moved out over the last year. Did you ever wonder why a full building emptied out that fast? She nodded at the panel. That's why. That's what it looks like. It just used to be quieter. The notice came that afternoon, slid under our door on cream-colored paper, with a logo in the corner, Halcyon Property Group. It was addressed to June by name, not to me, and it was written in the soft, poisonous language of people who have lawyers. It regretted to inform her that the building had entered a revitalization phase. It noted that aging infrastructure might result in intermittent service interruptions. I read that line twice. Intermittent service interruptions, 3 days after someone pulled her breaker in the dark. And it made her an offer. A relocation incentive. A check. A real one. A number with commas. In exchange for signing away her lease and vacating within 30 days. The offer, it said, was available until Friday. After Friday, the letter continued. Halcyon would pursue other avenues consistent with its business plan for the property. Friday. It was Tuesday. While I was still reading it, June's phone buzzed on the counter. She looked at it and didn't pick it up, so I saw the preview before it faded. A text from a number saved as Malden. It said, "Hope the heat's not too bad up there. Friday's a good deadline, June. Take the money." Everyone else did. Who's Malden? Curtis Malden. She said the name like it tasted bad. He's their guy. Not the owner. The owner's a company in another state that owns 40 buildings. Malden's the one they send to empty a building out. He's got a title on a business card, but the job is this: making people leave. She finally picked up the phone, turned it face down. He's been very patient with everyone else. Broken elevators that took 4 months to fix. Heat that goes out in January. Water pressure that dies on the top floors. Nobody can prove it's on purpose. Because a building this old, things break, except they only ever break in the units that still have tenants paying the old rent. Funny how that works. Can he do that? Just cut your power? Slide you a letter? He can do whatever he wants until someone stops him, June said. And so far, nobody's had the money or the time or the proof to stop him. So everybody takes the check and leaves. She looked at me. I'm the last one on this floor. That's why the breaker was mine and not yours. You're on a normal lease, Ethan. I'm the problem. I'm the one paying $400 a month for a 2-bedroom in a neighborhood where that number is now a punchline. I'm the thing standing between Halcyon and a building full of luxury units. She almost smiled. I'm the reason the act dies. That night I learned why she couldn't just take the check. And it was the part that turned this from her problem into mine. We'd moved both our mattresses into the living room, which was the only space with 2 working units, and we lay in the dark on opposite sides of the room with the fans going and the city glowing orange through the blinds. And June talked to the ceiling, because it's easier to tell the truth to a ceiling than to a face. She had a brother, Theo, 16. Their parents were gone. A car. 4 years ago, black ice on a bridge, and June had been 23 and suddenly the only thing standing between her little brother and a group home. So she'd taken guardianship, and she'd taken this apartment because it was the only place in the school district she could afford on what she made, and she'd built her whole fragile life around one number, $400 a month. Theo was at their aunt's for the summer, which was the only reason he wasn't sweating through this with us. But in September he came back, to this apartment, to this school, to the one stable thing she'd managed to give him after the worst year of both their lives. "If I take the check," she said, "it looks like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. And it's first, last, and deposit on a place half this size an hour from his school. And then it's gone, and then I'm exactly where I was, except now Theo's the new kid again, in a worse place, and I've spent the one card I had to play." Her voice was steady in the way that cost something. "Malden thinks I'm being stubborn. I'm not being stubborn. I literally cannot afford to leave. That's the trap. He's not betting I'll cave because I'm weak. He's betting I'll cave because I'm poor, and the heat is 110 degrees, and eventually a person just can't take it anymore." Down on the street, a car alarm went off and died. The fans turned. "Then we don't leave," I heard myself say. "We document." She turned her head toward me in the dark. "We? He's counting on nobody having proof," I said. "So we get proof. Every shutoff, every notice, every text. Timestamps, photos, all of it. You've been fighting this alone for a year and losing because it was your word against a company. It's not your word anymore. It's 2 people and a phone full of receipts." She was quiet for a long time. Then, so soft I almost missed it under the fans, "You could just stay out of it. It's not your lease. He'd leave you alone." "I know," I said. "Then why?" I didn't have a clean answer. I had the memory of her flinching at a creak in the hallway. I had 14 months of careful distance, and one honest night on the floor. "Because you knocked on my door," I said. "And I let you in. That means something now." Wednesday, the heat became a weapon the city itself was warning about. A heat advisory went out at noon, a real one, the kind with a named temperature, 106 in the shade with worse coming Thursday and Friday, warnings on every phone to check on elderly neighbors and never leave anyone in a hot room. And that same afternoon, right on cue, a man in a Halcyon polo shirt came to service the building's water system, and after he left, the water pressure on our floor dropped to a warm brown trickle. "For repairs," he said. "Should be back by the weekend," he said. No act troubles for us. I check the panel every few hours now, and June and I had rigged a chair against it so we'd hear anyone try. But the water was a new front, and I understood the pattern now the way June already did. They weren't trying to break one thing. They were trying to make the whole apartment, in the worst heat of the year, into a place a human being simply could not stay. Constructive eviction, June called it. A phrase she'd learned the hard way. You don't have to throw someone out if you can make staying unbearable enough that they leave on their own and call it their choice. So, we started building the file. We photographed the pulled breaker, the notice, the texts, the brown water with a timestamp. June started a log, a plain document, date and time and what happened, the way she should have started a year ago. Except a year ago she'd been alone and exhausted and hadn't believed anyone would take her word over a company's. I taped my phone under the hallway smoke detector, angled at the breaker panel, recording. If Malden's people came for the breaker again, we'd have them on video. And then, because the advisory said to, we went down the hall and knocked on Mr. Okafor's door. He was 81. He'd lived in the building since before Halcyon bought it, since before the neighborhood turned, and he answered the door in an undershirt with a damp towel around his neck, and his apartment behind him was an oven. His AC, he told us, had gone funny a week ago, and the building hadn't sent anyone, and he hadn't wanted to be a bother. June looked at me. I looked at the advisory on my phone. Never leave anyone in a hot room. You're not staying in there, June told him. Come stay with us. We've got the 2 units and the fans, and we're not taking no. I don't want to intrude on you young people, Mr. Okafor said. Mr. Okafor, June said gently. Intrude, please. Intrude, that night. With Mr. Okafor asleep and safe in the armchair, June and I did the things she'd never had the nerve or the company to do alone. We went looking for the people who'd already left. She still had numbers. Old group texts from the building, back when there'd been a building's worth of people in it. A tenants thread that had slowly gone dead as unit after unit emptied. Most of the numbers were disconnected or ignored us. But one answered. A woman named Renata who'd lived in 3B for 9 years and taken Halcyon's check 8 months ago, and when June explained what was happening, Renata went quiet on the line for a long moment, and then said, low and bitter, they did the heat to you too. She told us the rest in a rush, like something she'd needed to say out loud for months. Her stove had failed for 6 weeks. Her hot water came and went. Malden had slid the same cream-colored letters under her door, the same shrinking offer, the same patient smile in the lobby. She'd fought it first. Then her kid got sick from the cold apartment in February, and she'd been alone and exhausted, and she'd signed, and she'd hated herself for it ever since. I kept everything, though, Renata said. The letters, the texts. I don't know why. I think I wanted somebody someday to believe me. A pause. You're the first person who ever called to ask. Would you send it to us? June asked. All of it? With your name on it? With my name on it, Renata said, with bells on it. You go get him. June hung up and looked at me across the dark room, and there were 2 more people in this fight now than there'd been that morning. And she said the truest thing anybody said all week. We weren't the first. We were just the first ones who weren't alone. I wrote Renata's account into the log under its own timestamp. The file was getting heavier. It was starting to feel less like a diary of things done to us, and more like a case. Thursday morning, before the basement, we made one phone call that turned the case from something we had into something we could fire. June had found a tenant lawyer, a legal aid attorney named Miss Okonkwo, who took calls at 8 and listened without interrupting while June laid out 14 months and 6 minutes. When June finished, there was a short silence, and then Miss Okonkwo asked one question. Do you have any of it in writing? Or is it your word? It's not my word, June said, and I heard her voice change as she said it, heard the year of being disbelieved finally lift off her shoulders. It's photos. Texts in his own words. A log with dates. A former tenant willing to go on record. And a roommate who watched all of it. Then you don't have a housing complaint, Miss Okonkwo said. You have a pattern. A pattern is what turns the building is old into the landlord did this on purpose, and intent is the whole game. Get me anything that shows they planned it, a schedule, an internal note, an instruction, and I can get an inspector out and an emergency order that stops the shutoffs cold. Without intent, it's your sad story against their old pipes. With intent, it's their problem. A pause. Find me the intent. I hung up thinking about the word. Intent. Something that showed they'd planned it. And I thought about the one room in the building I hadn't been in yet. Thursday I found the thing that changed it from a fight we might lose into a fight we could win. I'd gone down to the basement to check the building's main electrical, half detective and half just needing to move. Miss Okonkwo's words still ringing. Find me the intent. The basement was a low concrete maze of pipes and dust that Halcyon clearly thought no tenant would ever bother with, and the utility room at the end of it was unlocked, because why would you lock a room full of nothing anyone wanted? Except taped inside the main panel door, at eye level, where a crew could read it while they worked, was a schedule. A laminated sheet, water-stained at one corner, the kind of thing that gets referred to daily and reprinted monthly. And it listed by unit and by date scheduled maintenance interruptions, power, water, gas, for exactly 3 units. Ours, June's room, and Mr. Okafor's. The 3 occupied units on the whole schedule, nobody else's, because nobody else was left to interrupt. Every random failure of the last week was on it, dated in advance, and every one still to come was on it too, marching down the page toward Friday. It was intent. It was the whole game, laminated and taped up where they thought no one would look, because the entire plan depended on tenants being too tired and too transient to ever walk into their own basement. And at the bottom, under the grid, in a different pen and a hurried hand, someone had scrawled the line I photographed 4 separate times to be sure I had it clean. Push through Fry. Let the heat do the work. Let the heat do the work. I photographed the whole sheet. I did not take it. A stolen document is worthless, and I'd read enough now to know it. I photographed it, time-stamped, in place, and I left it exactly where it hung, and I went back upstairs with my heart going like a drum. Malden was in our hallway when I came up, standing outside our door in the heat in a crisp shirt that hadn't wilted, somehow, looking at his phone, and he glanced up at me with a pleasant, patient smile. "You'd be the roommate," he said. "The one on the real lease. You don't have a dog in this fight. Friend, I'd hate to see you make it yours." His eyes went to my phone in my hand and stayed there a beat too long. It's a shame about the heat. But comfort's a privilege, not a right. The lease guarantees 4 walls. It doesn't guarantee it'll be pleasant inside them. He pocketed the phone. Friday, June signs or Friday, Halcyon starts eviction on the paperwork we've built. Either way, that unit's empty by fall. Have a good night. He walked to the stairs. At the top he paused, without turning around. "Tell her the offer drops 10% every day she waits past Friday," he said. "The heat's not my problem. Her lease is." And he was gone. I went inside. June took one look at my face and stood up. "What?" she said. "What did you find?" Thursday night, Malden showed me he'd done his homework on June too, and that he wasn't only going to make us hot, he was going to make us afraid. The email came to June's phone at 9 from a Halcyon legal address CCing Malden, formal and cold. It regretted to note that Halcyon's records indicated an unauthorized long-term occupant in June's unit, a minor, not named on the lease, in apparent violation of the occupancy terms. It requested she cure this violation and reminded her that lease violations were grounds for termination independent of any relocation offer. It ended by noting Halcyon took the welfare of minors seriously and would be obligated to make appropriate referrals if the situation was not resolved. June read it and put the phone down very carefully, the way you set down something that might break, and then she pressed both hands flat on the counter and breathed. "Theo," she said. "He's not on the lease." When I got guardianship, you're supposed to add a minor. And I was 23 and drowning, and I didn't know. And now it's a violation, and Malden knows it's a violation, and he just told me that if I don't leave, he'll report me. Her voice cracked for the first time in 4 days. He'll make it about whether I'm a fit guardian. He'll get a caseworker looking at whether Theo should be living with a sister who can't even keep them in a legal apartment. He'll use my brother. He won't, I said. You don't know that he won't, I said, because a man who plays that card is a man who's out of better ones. He's not threatening you because he's winning, June. He's threatening you because Friday's coming and you're still here. I turned my phone around and showed her the photo again, the laminated schedule, the note at the bottom. Let the heat do the work. He built a paper case that you're the problem. We just found the paper that says he's the problem. He wrote it down. They always write it down, because they never think anyone poor enough to fight them will ever find it. She looked at the photo for a long time. Mr. Okafor was asleep in the armchair with the fan on him, snoring gently. Safe. Out the window, the heat sat on the city like a hand. Okay, June said finally, and something in her voice had turned to steel. Okay. Then we don't wait for Friday. We go first. We almost didn't get the chance, because Friday came early, and it came for Mr. Okafor. We'd stayed up planning. A tenant lawyer June had found who took calls in the morning, a housing inspector's complaint line, a reporter at the city paper who'd written about Halcyon before. The plan was to file everything at once, Friday at 9, before Malden's deadline could mean anything, but at 4 in the morning, in the worst heat of the whole week, I woke to June's hand shaking my shoulder and her voice thin with panic. And Mr. Okafor was slumped in the armchair, and he was breathing wrong, and his skin was hot and dry, and he wouldn't fully wake. The fans had been going, but sometime in the night, the breaker to the living room units had been pulled again. The chair we'd propped against the panel shoved quietly aside, and the room had climbed back into the hundreds while 3 exhausted people slept, and an 81-year-old man's body had started to fail in the heat. I called 911, and I have never heard my own voice sound like it did, giving that dispatcher our address. June was already moving, cold towels from the tap, at the old man's neck and wrists, her voice low and steady in his ear. Stay with me, Mr. Okafor. You're okay. Help's coming. Stay with me. The same voice she must have used on a 16-year-old the year their parents died. A voice that had done hard things before and knew how. I flipped the living room breaker back, and the units roared, and the cold came. Too late to have mattered, exactly on time to prove a point. And then I did one more thing, half on instinct, and half on 4 days of Malden teaching me precisely who he was. I ran to the hallway and pulled my phone down from under the smoke detector, the one that had been recording the panel all week, and I scrolled back through the dark hours with my hands shaking, and there it was, time-stamped. 1:14 a.m. A man in a halcyon polo, letting himself onto our floor with a key, crossing to the panel unhurried, pulling the living room breaker with 2 fingers, and walking away without once looking at the door behind which 3 people were sleeping. On the night of a heat advisory, in a building he'd been paid to empty. I stood in the hallway and watched it twice, and something cold and clear settled over the fear. This wasn't a shrinking offer and a patient smile anymore. This was on video. The paramedics came. They got fluids into Mr. Okafor and got his temperature down and said we'd caught it in time, that another hour might have been another story. And they said the thing that made June grip my arm hard enough to bruise, they'd note the ambient temperature and the ACK failure in their report. An official report. A city document with a timestamp saying that on this night this room was dangerously, near lethally hot. Malden had wanted the heat to do his work. He'd just handed us the evidence that it nearly did. June stood in the gray almost dawn with her brother's future and an old man's life both hanging on what she did next, and she wasn't scared anymore. I watched the fear leave her the way water leaves a wrung cloth. "Now," she said. "We go now." We took it all to Malden Friday morning, and the sky finally broke while we did it. He was in the lobby at 9, right on schedule, holding a folder with June's name on it, wearing the same pleasant patience, ready for a beaten woman to come down and sign. What he got instead was the two of us, and behind us the housing inspector June had gotten on the phone at 7, and behind her the reporter, notebook already out, and the rain, because the heat wave finally cracked that morning, a week of pressure letting go all at once. Thunder and a hard gray downpour hammering the lobby windows so loud we all had to raise our voices. "June," Malden started, smooth as ever. "Smart girl." "Let's get you. I'm not signing anything," June said. "You are." I laid it out on the lobby table, in order, the way you build a thing that can't be argued with. The photos of the pulled breaker, the log, the texts, his own words. The heat's not my problem, her lease is. The email threatening to report a 16-year-old to make his guardian homeless. The laminated schedule from the basement, the deliberate calendar of failures. Let the heat do the work. In someone's own handwriting. And the video, the clearest one. His man, 1:14 a.m., pulling the breaker on a room with an 81-year-old sleeping in it, hours before an ambulance. The inspector watched the video twice. The reporter wrote fast. And Malden's pleasant patience finally slipped, and underneath it was just a man doing math and hating the answer. "This is," he tried for the old tone, "a building this old breaker's trip. You can't prove intent. You wrote it down," I said. "You cut the power. We kept the receipts." June stepped up beside me then, and she put one more thing on the table. A printout, Renata's account, signed, with the letters and texts Renata had kept for 8 months because she'd wanted someone someday to believe her. "You did it to her too," June said. "And to the family in 2A, and the man in 5C, and everyone else you smiled at in this lobby before they signed. She kept everything, Curtis. They all did. You spent a year betting that poor and tired meant stupid. It doesn't. It just means quiet." And we got loud. "There's a paramedics report," the inspector said, quietly, not to us, mostly to Malden, "documenting a near-fatal heat event in a unit with a disabled cooling system. And there's video of your employee disabling it. Mr. Malden." I'd stopped talking. This isn't a housing complaint anymore. This is the kind of thing that has a detective attached to it. Malden looked at the table full of paper. He looked at the reporter's notebook. He looked at June, the last tenant, the $400 problem. The woman who was supposed to be too poor and too tired and too alone to do exactly this, and whatever he saw in her face told him it was over. He didn't say another word. He picked up his folder with June's name on it, and he walked out into the rain without an umbrella, and that was the least dramatic thing in the world, which is how those men leave when the documents come out, quietly, getting wet. Because paper doesn't care how crisp your shirt is. Halcyon settled fast, the way companies do when the alternative is a detective and a headline. The deliberate shutoffs, once the inspector's report and the video were in the city's hands, turned Halcyon's revitalization into a liability they wanted gone overnight. Mr. Okafor came home from the hospital to a working act, and a formal letter of apology he framed and hung crooked in his kitchen. June's lease was made airtight. Theo added, legally on the record, the violation Malden had tried to weaponize dissolved into a form filed and stamped. Curtis Malden was, the reporter's article noted a month later, no longer with Halcyon Property Group, and was answering questions from people whose questions came with subpoenas. June kept her $400 a month. She kept the school district. When September came, Theo would come back to the one stable thing his sister had managed to hold on to through the worst luck two kids ever had. And it would still be there, cool and legal, and theirs, because she'd finally had proof and a witness and a reason to fight instead of fold. Renata called once more. After the article ran, she'd cried reading it, she said. Not because it fixed her own 8 months of cold showers and self-blame, but because somebody had finally made it a matter of record that none of it had been in her head. "You believed me," she said again, like it was the whole thing. And maybe it was. June wrote her number down and told her the tenant's thread wasn't dead anymore. 3 of the old neighbors were talking again. A building that Malden had spent a year carefully emptying into silence had, in a single rainy morning, started to become a building full of people who knew each other's names. And the two of us never moved our mattresses back apart. That's the part I didn't see coming, though I suppose everyone else already has. Somewhere in those sweltering documented nights, the fans, the log, the old man snoring in the armchair, the two of us awake at 3 planning how to save a home, the careful line down the middle of the hall had quietly stopped existing. We didn't announce it. We just never went back to our separate rooms. And one night, wakes after the rain, lying in the dark that was finally, blessedly cool, June said into the quiet, "I have to tell you something about the first night." "I know," I said. "You didn't come because of the heat." "No," I felt her turn toward me. That afternoon, in the hall, I heard Malden's guys talking outside the door. About me, about how the holdout on 4 wouldn't last the heat wave. And I got so scared, Ethan, scared in a way I hadn't let myself be in a year. And I stood in my hot, dark room, and I thought about who in this whole building I wasn't afraid to be near. And there was one door. Her voice was very soft. The act was the excuse. Your door was the reason. I thought about 14 months of labeled fridge shelves and polite distance, and how close we'd both come to living our whole lives one wall apart, and calling it fine. "Can I tell you something back?" I said. Yeah, I remembered her standing at my door at 1 in the morning, arms wrapped around herself, asking to come in. And I gave her the only answer that had ever really mattered, the one I should have had the courage to mean from the very first night. Stay. Not tonight. Not for the heat. Stay. And in the cool dark, finally, she did. If someone was making your home unlivable on purpose, pulling the power in the dead of a heat wave, betting you were too tired and too broke to fight, would you have had the nerve to photograph the proof before the deadline? Or would you have taken the check, called it your choice, and walked away like they wanted? And have you ever had someone knock on your door at your lowest, most frightened hour, and only understood much later that the night you let them in was the night your whole life quietly turned? Who was it? Tell me about the person who was standing at your door. If this one got to you, subscribe, because the next story is about a text sent to the wrong number at 3 a.m. and the stranger who answered it.